Welcome. And I've got a couple of questions I've got to ask you. Is your organization healthy? How do you even know if it's healthy? You know, I read the book, The Advantage. And of course, knowing David Hoyt for many years as he was the president of John Maxwell Leadership Company. And he put on events. I mean, he was over everything. Anything I needed, I called David. And he's such a great leader. He's been in leadership for 25 years. And now he goes into organizations, helping to make them healthy. He did that for us when I was CEO of MAPS, Keller Williams MAPS Coaching and Training Organization. And, you know, you helped us so much. And I want you to help the people here today. I know that's what you do, is add value to every single person. And Patrick Lencioni, I mean, he's one of my favorite authors. So how did you get involved with Patrick?
So it was many years ago. I started with John Maxwell in '98, and then early 2000s, I realized I wanted to have an annual event that I went to that I had nothing to do with in terms of producing, but was for my personal growth. And it was the Willow Creek Global Leadership Summit. And so I can't remember if it was the very first year I went, but it was definitely one of the early years that I attended there. Patrick spoke. It was right after the five dysfunctions of a team had come out, and I thought he was an amazing speaker. And long story short, I just called his office, introduced myself, what I did for John, said I was going to be in the area, which I was going to be on the West Coast. Ended up spending a half day with him and his team, and we just hit it off and realized had so many things in common in terms of our organizations, passions for leadership. And that began really a long distance, many year, both friendship, but also idea sharing and helping each other as we had questions in our various businesses. And then when I hit what I call my halftime experience, just about 9 years ago now, as I slow down and think back, I realized I really wanted to get on the front lines, working with leaders myself, and then had the opportunity to join the table group 8 years ago.
Yeah, well, I know it was right after you started with them. We actually had you come into the MAPS organization, and you just made it, you had so much passion about helping people become healthy. So, what is it about Patrick that he says the single greatest advantage is having your organization healthy?
Yeah, that's absolutely what we've discovered. And what we find is most leaders focus so much on what we call the smart side. So things like finance, marketing, strategy, operations, all important. Would never downplay the importance of those smart side functions, but because people went and got their education in those things, they feel comfortable. It's how they work their way up the ladder. A lot of leaders over-index there, and they're always trying to turn the smart dials. What we found is the greatest competitive advantage is when you can be smart and really good in those technical competencies, but you also are healthy. And when you're healthy, and by healthy, we mean there's minimal politics inside the organization, there's minimal confusion, there's minimal misalignment. That's when we can fully tap into the smart side and ultimately beat the competition. We've seen it time and time and time again when leaders really begin to focus on the health of their organization, they get that much smarter at the same time.
Well, it's about that alignment, like driving your car out of alignment. You can't go real
Yeah,
fast. It
right.
shakes, it's wobbly. And how many organizations actually, when you go into them, you find that, well, maybe there's a little bit of gossiping going on. Maybe people are talking behind each other's backs. Maybe there's not this alignment. And so the goals aren't
Yeah.
being met.
Yeah. We so talk a lot about every team has dysfunction. Even the healthiest teams have dysfunction, meaning you get two human beings together, there's going to be some level of dysfunction, even in healthy relationships, right? There's no such thing as perfection.
Yeah.
In our work, it's interesting. I've never truly gone back and categorized how many teams that I've worked with would I say that there is overall, like it feels healthy versus wildly dysfunctional. I'm going to say 75% are pretty good teams, but they also know they can get better or they're new or, there's one or two very specific issues. And then from time to time, I get to work in wildly dysfunctional situations as well. But every team I've ever encountered, and when I ask specifically about this team, Are there politics and where are there politics? What do you as a leader in the organization have some confusion around? Where do you wish you had greater clarity? Or there's some areas where we all know we're not truly aligned. We're pulling in some different directions. I've never encountered a team yet that didn't have some of those issues show up at some level.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, let's just look at the world. It's called
Right?
people. My husband and
Yes.
I get along most of the time as you and your wife do. Yet there are times that we have some
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
good discussions, right?
Very true. We have what we hope is healthy conflict. It may every now and then be unhealthy conflict, but hopefully it's healthy conflict.
Well, I have devoured the five dysfunctions of a team, and yet it's from the advantage that he really talks about the healthy organization. And there were four disciplines of a healthy organization. Tell us about those and how they come about.
Yeah. It's funny because the disciplines are so simple intellectually. When I'm setting this up with a team, I'll often say, hey, none of us probably have a medical background, but what are the three disciplines of physical health? Never had a team who couldn't come up with them in terms of diet, exercise, rest, etc. Intellectually simple, very hard to do. It's the same with disciplines of org health. Discipline one is build a cohesive leadership team. We know that org health flows better down, so we always want to start with the team at the top. At the same standpoint, it's not just about the leadership team. Ultimately, we want to build cohesive teams through the organization, and this is all about behavioral alignment. The second, and that's about overcoming politics, which we talked about a moment ago. The second discipline is about creating clarity, organizational clarity, and we think that clarity starts with clarity of why do we exist, how do we behave, what do we do, how will we succeed, what's the single most important thing right now, and then who does what, and that includes things like decision-making rights. We call those the six critical questions. And once we have clarity around those six critical questions, we find that if we use those as filters in making decisions, it allows for more consistent decision-making down through the organization. And then there's a theme with discipline 3 and 4. Discipline 3 is all about over-communicating that clarity as the CEO or even the leadership team being the chief reminding officer. And discipline 4 is reinforcing that clarity. Just looking at our human systems and everything from how we hire to how we onboard to how we do employee engagement and making it sure it all aligns and ties back to that clarity.
Well, when you think about all of those, that takes some time. I mean, I was just listening to those six questions and going back to we spend an entire day.
Yeah.
Yet,
Yeah.
how often do you go in? You don't just go in one day, you come back, right?
Yeah, one of the things that we encourage leadership teams to do with or without us, this isn't we have to be involved by any means, is the idea of quarterly, what we call it slowing down to speed up. And it's typically an offsite, it's get out of your regular environment and always go back to organizational health. Look at those four disciplines and say, how are we doing as a team in
Hmm.
those four? But also just it's that time to really work on the business. All leaders get sucked in that day to day to just in the business, in the business, in the business. The real disciplined teams we find will take a day or two or a quarter and they'll rise up and work on the business. And that's including working on the relationships, continuing to build trust, give one another feedback. And I'm saying it like it's no big deal. It's a really big deal. Like the best teams do those things consistently. It allows for the healthy behavior that creates ultimately the clarity that their organization needs.
Well, the chief reminding officer, I really like that, the CRO, right? Jack
Mhm.
Welch, when I met with him for dinner up in Atlanta one time, he and Susie, I asked him about talking about vision. And he said, oh, I talked about vision every day. I was so tired of talking about vision, I thought I was going to throw up if I had to talk about it one more time. Yet, why do you think a lot of people as top leaders, they don't talk about the vision, they don't remind
Yeah.
people, and they don't keep things clear?
Yeah. I think they have clarity. Earlier this morning, I was on the phone with a leader and I asked her, how much clarity do you think you have, your team has? And felt like a lot of clarity, but I've frequently asked leaders that question and then gone to the team that they lead, not even lower in the organization, and
Right.
found the others on their team don't even have that same level of clarity. And so we naturally assume that whatever level of clarity we have, others have, and that's just not the case. And the reason I say this to leaders all the time you can debate, I'm sure, intellectually, how many times somebody needs to hear something to truly know it or understand it. I'm not concerned about that. I think the biggest thing of over communicating clarity is to overcome organizational cynicism. How many times have we been in a meeting, heard a leader get up, cast the vision, set the direction, and then crickets after that? And we all then go back to the way we've always operated. And so tell leaders, you've got to over communicate to overcome that natural cynicism of people who are like, this is flavor of the day. I'm going to just operate the way I always have. But when they hear it and hear it and hear it and hear it, all of a sudden they'll understand, hey, my leader's serious and I better get on
Well,
board with the vision.
yeah, because their thinking is going in this direction, and they've already cut those neural pathways that this is the way I think. Now the
Oh, yeah.
leader's over here thinking a different way. It's not going to happen with just one time. Well, I told them that. No, did you tell him and tell him? I know I was guilty of that, and probably still am. I'm not talking enough about the vision and where we're going and how important it is, right? We can all get into that trap. And the politics, oh my goodness, there are politics in almost every organization. So, what do you do to get rid of the politics, for heaven's sakes? That's a big one.
Yeah. One is just casting a vision for what healthy looks like. And when we talk about overcoming politics, I'm going to give it in the context of a team. In a large organization, it's unrealistic, this definition, but we absolutely think it's realistic on a team. And it's basically when everybody on that team has the same conversation, the same way, regardless of who they're talking to on the team. And it doesn't matter if it's one on one. And hey, trust me, I've been guilty. I mean, we've all been. I can't fathom the leader's not been guilty. Somebody on a team, high trust relationship with, sensitive topic. We know there's differing opinions. With that person we have high trust with, we're being very candid, open, honest, how we really feel. All of a sudden, somebody else enters the conversation that's on the team that we maybe don't have that same level of trust with, or we know has a different opinion. And maybe we clam up completely. We change the subject, or even if we keep talking about the subject, if there was a fly on the wall, they would know, or they would say, hey, what just happened? Dynamic change in this conversation. And we want to build on a team a level of trust and candor that we're just, when it's a business topic, we're going to be open, honest, we're going to get after the issue versus we're going to spin things or withhold information or talk about it differently that, when certain people are in the room. That's the goal. And it starts with casting vision for it, ultimately then building trust amongst teammates where we can have that open, honest, candid conversation.
Well, let's just talk about trust for just a moment. I know that, well, let's just go to what Lencioni says about you've got to have a vulnerability trust. It's got to be vulnerability based. There's a lot of companies that don't have that. So when you go in, what do you do, say, or jolt them with to where they understand? We got to be more vulnerable.
Yeah, it's one is I think saying acknowledging that in most business contexts, it's counterintuitive, it's difficult. Having people think, why is it difficult to be vulnerable? And my experience, I've spent a lot of time both thinking about this and talking to leaders about this. I think most people struggle with it because at some point in their career, it was weaponized against them. They took a risk and somebody kind of threw that vulnerability back in their face. And whether it was a stated vow or almost a secret vow, it's like, look, I'm not doing that again. That was painful and so forth. And I get it. We probably all had it weaponized at some point in our past. But the best teams choose to set maybe aside some of those past experiences, do their best to commit to not weaponize it with one another. And we make mistakes. One of the things to talk about is actually what builds trust is when we can apologize to one another. So, a perfect team isn't going to occasionally step on one another. It's not that they're not going to step on one another's toes. They're going to. We're going to every now and then cross the line. But when we can acknowledge it, apologize, we find it builds trust. And so, with teams, when we're spending time with a team, typically it's a couple day offsite like we did with your team, MAPS, we'll do what I call muscle building. We'll do a 30-minute 20, 30-minute exercise where we'll just have them demonstrate a little bit of vulnerability, realize why we survived that. And typically, like in a 20 to 30-minute conversation, it'll draw the team closer together and they'll all feel it. And they'll realize, even if we work together a long time, I just learned something about my teammates that I didn't know before. And now I have a higher level of respect. And I tell them all the time, just because we did the one exercise doesn't mean you're there. It's just a little bit of muscle building to continue to push yourself to be more vulnerable. And as you do it, that trust is going to grow.
Yeah, it was interesting because Pat Spillane, who has since passed away, yet great member of the MAPS team, moved from Denver to be here in Austin with us. And I remember the day at our stand-up meeting, he literally said to the group, I made a mistake yesterday. This is what I did, and I know it cost us some money, and I just apologize, and all I can say is it'll never happen again. This is what I learned from it. And all of our respect just went so much higher for him.
Yeah.
And here he was willing to be vulnerable, to actually talk with us about a mistake. And the greatest part about that is everybody learned from that mistake and knew that they didn't want to do it, right?
Right. And they knew their leader was self-aware. I think when people aren't willing to own up and admit their weaknesses or the mistakes, people wonder, do they know? Do they know they're not good at that? Or do they know they mess that up? Or are they so clueless, they somehow think, they've got all their stuff together in every area, or they didn't mess up that decision, but that's where leaders that struggle with vulnerability, especially around weaknesses and mistakes, I remind them that everybody already knows. You're really not telling them anything they don't know yet. You're just letting them know that you know this about yourself.
Well, you go into places. I want to know about some of the transformation that you have seen with these groups that you've been involved with, because these are top CEOs, top companies that you go into that we all look back and go, wow, I want to be like them when I grow up. Yet you've helped them transform. So give us one of those stories about transformation.
Yeah, I think about, and this isn't a massive company I'm going to share with you, but truly one of the healthiest organizations I've worked with. Today, they're a painting company, but not just any painting company. They paint giant warehouses. It's more of a kind of a blue collar type workforce, but the level of vulnerability and the level of trust amongst teams, it's unbelievable. Part of their purpose was they wanted to help their leaders have uncommon success and ultimately become millionaires. That's tied to their purpose. And because of their growth, they're an ESOP, et cetera. Because of their growth, when we started working with them, they were about $20 million. Today, they're $150 million. And as you talk to their CEO, he knows the biggest thing we did is we made some tough calls around the team, didn't have the right team in place. And then they made the foundation of their organization, how they were going to run their business was based on those 4 disciplines. And they've stayed true and committed to that. And it's just led to consistent exponential growth. And it's such a fun place for people to work. And so, it's funny because absolutely we work with massive companies, Fortune 100, everybody knows their name. And I'm always grateful for those opportunities. My personal favorite are the small to medium size where you can even have a greater impact. And it's not just maybe a division or a portion that's transformed, but literally every single person in that company is impacted by the healthy culture.
That conflict just seems to be abounding everywhere. Let's face it, people don't think alike. And if they thought like the leader, they'd be the leader, right? They'd be where the leader is. So how do you help people go through conflict to have a healthy team?
Yeah, once again, I think it starts with normalizing it and saying, and truly my experience, Dianna, is the best, most effective teams that I've worked with and observed have more conflict, not less. But the conflict is truly about the most important decisions. And what we find is when we're unwilling to have open, honest debate and dialogue and disagree on the most important decisions, we call it artificial harmony. When we live in artificial harmony, ultimately what we do is we have conflict about one another, and that's politics. And that's all the back room behind each other's backs stuff. Yeah. So number one is to say, we got to normalize it. And if we've lived in artificial harmony, we need to call it for what it is and say, we're going to push ourselves to be a little uncomfortable and speak up and be willing to disagree. Ultimately, we've got to commit. At the end of the day, leaders got to make a call and say, I need everybody to commit to this. But the best decisions are when we get everybody's full opinion. And one of the things I've learned about myself, and I share this often with leaders, is not proud of this. Here's a little vulnerability for you. I'm naturally passive aggressive. I'm naturally going to maybe hold back and engage in some politics. And so what I find, if I'm ever sharing something with my wife, Lori, that's going on at the table group that maybe I don't love, and I'm sharing my thoughts with her that I haven't shared directly in the room, I realize, oh shoot, I'm living in artificial harmony. I gotta assess why, and then I gotta push myself to go have maybe a difficult, uncomfortable conversation. And it's when folks get willing and have the courage to just have those difficult, uncomfortable conversations around business issues, that's healthy conflict and ultimately leads to better decisions.
Well, you know, Susan Scott has that beach ball conversation that she says when you're going in for decisions and you want to collaborate, you just picture everybody on a beach ball. And if they're on the red stripe, all they see is red. And if they're on the
Yeah.
blue stripe, all they see is blue. And you need that feedback. Yet there's some companies, they don't ever give feedback. They just get upset and say, okay, you're done, so to speak. How important is feedback?
I think it's critical. And to your point, I think almost all organizations don't provide enough. One of the things that I believe, it's a cliche, but it's true. It's feedback is a gift. And I talk a lot with folks down the organization trying to assess, like, what are their leaders doing well? What do they wish their leaders did differently, et cetera? I love to ask the question, what do you wish you received more of from your leaders? Hands down, the number one thing that I hear is feedback. I'd like feedback, especially from the best performers. And also, I think feedback's gotten a bad rap, just like I think accountability has gotten a bad rap. People somehow think it's negative and punitive. And I think feedback is all sides of the ledger. Feedback is, Dianna, you're a terrific interviewer. Dianna, you're so articulate, and celebrating those things that people are doing well. Just like when there's things that need to be improved or corrected, being willing to have those open, honest questions. And when we're a receiver, sure, you don't have to agree with everything, but at least you have the perspective of the other person as you think about kind of managing that relationship. Now, if you never agree with any of the feedback you receive, then that's probably that self-awareness issue, and we need to do some serious self-reflection. But I find the best leaders provide tons of feedback, and for the most part, folks welcome it, even if every now and then it stings in the moment.
Well, you know, feedback, they say, is the breakfast of champions. We're talking about a
Yes.
healthy organization. There's a lot of organizations that aren't eating because they don't get the feedback, and therefore they keep doing the same thing, and yet the leader expects different results. That, we already know, that's insanity. Well, with a leader, there are leaders that just want yes people around them. Have you encountered any of that? And if so, is there anything that you can do if you work for a leader that only wants a yes man or woman?
Yeah. So yes, I've encountered that. From my seat in our consulting, a couple of our principles is we got to be willing to enter the danger, and whatever's difficult, uncomfortable, maybe to address, we got to be willing to address it. We got to tell the kind truth. Got to give leaders feedback. And so when I see it, I try to enter the danger with them and tell the kind truth is doesn't feel like you really want feedback or conflict or debate. And we find the best teams are going to get input for their people for weighing in to buy in and get best ideas, et cetera. If you're a person working for somebody like that, and Pat was really good at this when before he started the table group, when he was part of the team, he had the ability to confront leaders, to confront up. And I think what made him so good was he always did it with humility, and then he told the truth. And I find that when folks are willing to approach their leaders with not like pointing the finger, like type thing, negative accountability, but like true humility, and I'm with you and I'm for you, and here's something I've observed, at least the leaders that I want to work for long term are open and willing to that feedback. Those that are just unwilling, literally unwilling to hear any feedback, even from the people under them, they're probably not who you're going to want to work for. And if you've tried it with humility, you've on a couple occasions confronted those things, and the leader's unwilling to change or hear it, then I would say the best thing you can do is free yourself up to the market, because there's a lot of great leaders out there who want that feedback.
Well, it comes back to values. I mean, we can actually work with people that don't have the same beliefs. Yet to work with people that don't have the same values, that's when things kind of go haywire. And I think this resistance that you feel when you go in fact, let me ask you, what's the biggest resistance that you've ever faced with an organization?
So for us, in terms of engaging in the work, it's the biggest resistance is just dedicating the time. We challenge our leaders. Like if we really want to get maximum results, we need to spend a couple days offsite with the team. I was just, once again, a phone call this morning, they were like, "Hey, what can you do in 2 hours?" I'm like, well, I mean, we can move the needle this much. We can have one really important critical conversation, but if you really are all in on org health, it's more than 2 hours. So for us, that's the biggest resistance. What I'm most evaluating, do I want to work with this client? It's buy-in and commitment of the leader. I know that if a leader really values organizational health, understands their role in driving it, and is committed to that, we're going to see incredible results for the organization and in terms of our role in an engagement. But if somebody else is talking that leader into it and they're not really committed, and I say this all the time, honestly, the best thing you can do is not hire us, because here's what's going to happen. In that little engagement we do with your team, you're going to have folks on your team who buy in and realize, wow, if we really focused on health, how much more effective we would be, how much more joy we would have, et cetera. And then if they see you're not committed and aren't all that serious about it, you're going to undermine your credibility with those leaders. And so, a leader that's committed, great results. A leader that's not, it's going to be frustrating for all involved.
Well, yeah, and that's probably when people want to leave that leader, right? I mean, one of
Right.
the greatest questions and the most difficult and challenging questions I ever asked is, what's it like to work with me? And sometimes what you hear back, or when we would do the feedback, I know when you were president of the John Maxwell organization, you gave a feedback. I wanted to know, is there a feedback that people can give to where they're anonymous, right? And you said, oh, yeah, we have an assessment for that. And getting those things back on the 5 levels of leadership and hearing what people say, sometimes, wow, it is such an eye-opener for you to become a better leader. And I know when we did Bold, those leaders that attended the Bold class, their agents went so much better. And I just got to say this because it was so funny the other day. A person called and they wanted Tony to coach their team, right? Tony's my husband. And they said, we want them to sell more. And Tony goes, okay, and what do you expect on this Zoom call? And how long will it be? And they said, well, we were thinking giving you 15 minutes. And I thought, 15 minutes to help everybody sell more. That doesn't really work that way, right? So having a healthy organization, it's like going to the doctor. You don't just go and he says, oh, yeah, you're healthy. No, they do treadmill tests. They do all these different things. You spend a day with them, right?
Right.
And so how long do you like to meet with people to get just to even find out about their organization?
Yeah. So on the front end, it's really getting the perspective of the leader. What do they think the team is doing well? Where are the issues and challenges, et cetera?
Yeah.
It's situational past that. There are times where I just intuitively feel like I probably need to get some other feedback from folks on the team. Sometimes, if I question how aware is the leader, honestly, my favorite way is not to get too much pre-feedback on a team, but is to get in the room with them. And get in the room, you can quickly assess. You can just observe, is the conversation free flowing, and or are people guarded? And so part of our consulting secret sauce isn't isn't what I would say over engineering or over preparation. It's to use our real time intuition of what's going on with this team. And then the moment we sense something's kind of off or wonky, like ask the question or make the observation and try to get us into maybe a more real conversation than the team has had historically. And that's where I find breakthrough happens.
Yeah, getting real with each other. About how long does that take as you get into this? Because do they still want to be a smart organization versus a healthy one?
Very much team by team. I mean, I've had team. So typically, before I engage with the team, I highly encourage them to read The Advantage, maybe the five dysfunctions, so they understand the roadmap of where we're going.
Uh-huh.
Teams that do that like understand the work intellectually before we even get started. And so, I mean, I've literally had teams in the first 5 to 10 minutes put things on the table that they've probably never put on the table of things that's holding the team back that we need to just talk about, figure out how we work through that situation, get aligned for the sake of one another, for the sake of creating clarity in the organization. And then I've had others that they say they want to focus on health, but they keep running back to the smart side, and it can take literally months, maybe even years of we need that in a small incremental change. So not one size fits all. It is nice when we can immediately kind of get after some of the big things and teams fully buy into org health. But as you can imagine, it's across the board. And a lot of it comes down to the leader, the buy-in and commitment of the leader.
Well, speed of the leader, speed of the pack, and
Yep,
everything rises and falls on leadership, as we know. So,
100%.
if you're listening to this and you haven't read the books, the the five dysfunctions of a team, or the advantage, or the new one, the working genius, which is a whole nother podcast just to do that one. Let me tell you, read the book. And David, how could they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'll share my email address, david.hoyt at tablegroupconsulting.com. I always love hopping on the phone with leaders. Doesn't mean we have to talk about an engagement per se, but just leadership questions, a sounding board, somebody to float a particular difficult leadership situation and get some outside perspective. Always happy to have conversations with leaders.
Well, and I know every time that we're at some leadership function, you're talking to all the leaders and you're not talking about what you know. You're always asking questions. And that's what I've always admired about you. You're a great learner and you take all of that in and you're willing to share with others. And I'm so appreciative of you sharing with us today, David. It's been great to reconnect. I remember calling you or texting you so many times on my gratitude calls saying how
Yes.
grateful I was for you and still am of you being in my life. You're a great person that adds value. You added value today. We thank you very much. And one last question. What is the question that I didn't ask that you wish I would have? And just answer it for us.
It's a great question, Diana. I am genuinely the first thing that comes to my mind, and it's why do you want to lead? And Pat, one of his other books that we haven't mentioned yet is called The Motive,
Oh, yeah.
and it was one of his more recent books that he wrote. But if you were going to read Pat's books in kind of a certain specific order, he would say, and I would say, the very first book any leader should read is The Motive. Why do you want to lead? And we find there's reward-based leaders that it's kind of about the perks and the privileges, and I'm going to pick and choose what I want to do. And I've got it to the top. I'm going to enjoy it. Which, hey, there are of course perks and privileges of making your way up through leadership. We're not denying that, but the responsibility-based leaders are the most effective. And they're going to do the hard things of leadership. They're going to have those difficult and uncomfortable conversations. They're really going to focus on building their team. They're going to manage their direct reports. They're going to over communicate. They're going to do the hard things of leadership. And that's where we see the greatest results. And so I just always encourage leaders, way back when, why'd you get into lead? But even now, like, why do you continue to lead and really weigh those motives and make sure you're leading from that responsibility based side of leadership?
David, what a great interview today. You've helped us so much. Thank you. And remember, just click the link below to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and it's about becoming more. as a leader, as an organization, and make certain your organization is healthy.